Okay, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you Linda van den Heever. I've met Linda a few years ago at a lovely South African reserve called Witstrand. We were there for a bird of prey working group annual conference, whatever you want to call it. And I think you were working on your masters then or something. I can't remember what it was. Even before the masters, you see. So we know each other for quite some while. Since then, I've had contacts with Linda, mainly because of vulture safe zones that we want to create and various other things. And then this lead thing suddenly popped up its ugly head. And I found out, no, but Linda's working on a PhD on lead in vultures and so on. So we started talking about lead in vultures, etc. And one thing leads to another. And we had a workshop on lead poisoning at the end of February in this country, where we brought all the role players together. We had people from the Ministry of Health, Defense, Police, obviously Ministry of Environment, from the mines, just about quite some wide representation, and talking about this issue of lead poisoning, not only in animals, but in humans. But I think I'll give Linda a chance to give a talk first, because she's talking about lead poisoning in vultures, not in humans, and then we can continue the discussion from there. Thank you.
There we go. Thank you very much, Holger. I hate this thing, but I'll... She threatened me if I don't use it. Right, so this is a topic that's occupied my every waking thought for the last 7 years. It's a project that BirdLife South Africa launched in 2016. When Hanneline Smith-Robinson, who many of you may know, went to Quito in Ecuador for a meeting of the CMS partners. And they raised the issue with South Africa, that South Africa has never actually evaluated lead levels in their local bird populations. In fact, it's never been done in Africa. It hasn't been done in Africa at that point. So she then came back, and I was looking for an honors project at the time. And she asked me if I would be interested in doing that, and here I am 7 years later, and thank goodness for my own sanity. The PhD is now behind me, and I can go on with my life as well. So before I start, I just want to tell you that by necessity, my talk is unfortunately quite technical. Parts of it is quite technical, and that is because I learned very quickly that I am dealing, unfortunately, with a very controversial topic. And initially, when I started my research, any results that I put out there met with quite fierce resistance within the hunting community. And I learned very early on that if I was going to make any headway with this, I needed to make sure that my T's were crossed and my I's dotted. So that is why the science is there. I needed to be very scientific for a very serious topic. So as many of you will know, and of course now this is the time it'll stop working.
Can you just, is it okay now?
So unless you've been living under a rock, you would all know that our vultures are in serious trouble. And this is the case around the world, actually. Of South Africa's 9 vulture species, 4 are considered critically endangered, 3 globally critically endangered. That's the white-backed vulture, the hooded vulture, and the white-headed vulture. And the regional population of bearded vulture is considered critically endangered as well. The lappet-faced vulture is considered endangered, and the only real species that is showing any real signs of recovery, and I put that in inverted commas, is the Cape vulture, who was recently uplisted again to back to vulnerable from endangered. So their populations seem to be stabilizing, but we're certainly not resting on our laurels. But thank goodness at least one species is doing okay. The main reason for this, without a doubt, is poisoning, and they reckon that over 60% of vulture mortalities across Africa is attributable to poisoning in various forms. So that's either intentional poisoning, when poachers don't want circling vultures to give away the position of a carcass, so they lace the carcass of an elephant or whatever with Temic, 2-step, and they can kill hundreds of vultures at a time. in that way. They are also in South Africa deliberately targeted for belief-based use. Many cultures in South Africa believe that if you are in possession of a vulture head, it will allow you to see into the future. They are also targeted, unfortunately, unintentionally, when farmers put out poison baits to deal with problem animals such as caracal or jackal, and then the vultures will come down, feed on those carcasses, and get secondary poisoning as a result. And then one type of poisoning which has received very little attention up until now was lead poisoning, which is also a form of unintentional poisoning. And that is what I'm going to talk to you about tonight. So just a little bit background on lead. Lead is what we call a heavy metal. It sits down here along with all the other heavy metals. And the reason why it's called a heavy metal is because of its atomic weight, which is 207. Carbon, which makes up the bulk of our bodies, has got an atomic weight of 32, I think. Correct me if I'm wrong. Am I wrong? No. I know it's not 28. Anyway. And like all heavy metals, it is incredibly toxic. So I always make the standard joke, if you want to do away with your spouse, you go with thallium, which sits right next to lead. It's tasteless and odorless, and it will kill someone very quickly. Unfortunately, sorry, I'm not familiar with this thing. Unfortunately for us and for the environment in general, lead is incredibly useful. It's a very unique metal. It's very heavy and dense, but at the same time, it's very soft. So it's very easy to form into different shapes. And so it's very cheap to work with. It's also very cheap to produce, to mine. And it's frequently mined as a byproduct of other mining operations, which also adds to the cheapness of the metal. It's also corrosion resistant, and that is why it's used in our lead acid batteries. And that's where the bulk of our lead goes in this day and age. It's in the batteries that drive our cars. But as I said, it is toxic, and this has been known since Egyptian times when they used lead as eyeliner and didn't understand why they were going blind, or understood but didn't care. So these are the main uses of lead in our modern society. As I said, the bulk of it is used in lead acid batteries. To a limited extent, it's still used in leaded fuel, mainly aviation fuel. In South Africa, this was phased out in 2006 for motor fuel, if I can call it that. Lead in paint was widely used up until recent times. Lead, to add to its useful properties, lead compounds have got very unique color properties. It creates very intense colors. But unfortunately, the paints that are produced with lead are incredibly toxic, and children are frequently exposed when they eat paint chips. It's also still used in solder, and then obviously, as you know, in ammunition to this day, and fishing weights. All of these uses are regulated, and for some unknown reason I will never understand, this is completely unregulated. We can freely shoot a toxic metal into the environment without any recourse whatsoever. So what makes lead a problem? Lead is what I call a master mimic. It's able to mimic essential metals in your body, especially metals such as calcium and zinc. If the body gets the option to choose between lead and calcium, it will preferentially take up lead instead, for reasons that we don't completely understand. It's also got a very strong affinity for what we call sulfhydryl groups. And what you see down here is just the basic structure of an amino acid. An amino acid is the building block of a protein. And the body builds those amino acids by binding these sulfhydryl groups. And in the presence of lead, that sulfhydryl group will be kicked out of the reaction. It'll bind lead instead, and proteins will not form properly. Now, do the math. Proteins are involved in every single system in your body. If lead interferes with the formation of proteins, every single system in your body will be affected, and that is exactly what lead does. It's one of the few toxins that can cross the blood-brain barrier, and the way it does that is a lecture in itself. And the blood-brain barrier is literally a device that your body evolved to make sure that toxins in your blood does not enter your brain. For obvious reasons, that's a bad thing. If toxins in your blood can enter your brain, then you've got a problem. Lead is one of the few materials that can do that, and it does that because it can hijack the channels that the body uses to absorb calcium into the brain. So lead hijacks those channels and it gets absorbed into the brain and just causes havoc to your neurological functioning. It affects every organ system in the body, as I said, and unfortunately children are particularly vulnerable because growing children need vast quantities of essential metals such as calcium and zinc, and in the presence of lead, their bodies will just absorb lead and it will really affect their development on all levels. So this, in a nutshell, is what my research was about. First and foremost, I was tasked to find out if lead is prevalent in South Africa's birds in general, and in vultures in particular. And from there, once I completed that study, it quickly became clear that we needed to do additional research. And the first and foremost, we needed to find out what the source of the lead poisoning was. We needed to answer the so what question. Does it have any measurable physiological effect? And flowing from that, did it have any effect on the movement behavior of the birds that I was studying, which in the event turned out to be vultures, but I'll talk about that in detail. So it turned out, it became clear very, very early on in my research that this was exclusively a vulture problem, particularly a gyps vulture problem, the Cape vultures and the whiteback vultures. You can see there, on average, over 2/3 of the birds that I sampled had lead levels over and above what would be considered background exposure. Lappet-faced vultures, my sample size was very small. I only sampled about 7 birds. And that seemed to be just slightly over background exposure, but not heavily so. But then if you can see other bird species, and that ranged from falcons to secretary birds to cranes, bustards, buzzards, that all seemed to be within background exposure. So from this, I concluded that whatever was going on here, it was linked to their scavenging lifestyle, their obligate scavenging lifestyle. Whereas other birds that do not rely on scavenging as a source of food were not facing exposure. So this led us to make some initial conclusions about where the lead could be coming from. The first and foremost was its scavenging lifestyle, as I just said. The second was the results that I saw in chicks specifically. And here I worked at Dronfield Nature Reserve. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Dronfield. It's a reserve just outside of Kimberley. I'm going to show you a slide in a minute. And what I saw there is that all the chicks on that reserve did not have similar blood lead levels. Some of them had incredibly high lead levels. Some of them had intermediate lead levels, and others had what we call background lead levels. Now, if the lead was coming from their environment, we would have expected all those birds to have similar blood lead levels, but they didn't. Some of them were incredibly high, and some of them were incredibly low. And that led us to conclude that whatever these birds were getting, they were getting from their parents. Whatever they were being fed by their parents, because they were still nest bound, the only possible avenue of exposure would be their parents. And that led us to conclude that this was possibly coming from lead ammunition embedded in carrion that these birds are feeding on. And the minute I published this, all hell broke loose. Okay. So after the hell broke loose and everyone calmed down, I then set out to prove my point, to illustrate where the lead was coming from. First, I did a desktop study, and I identified all the potential sources that these birds could be exposed to. The first was environmental lead, soil or dust that they could be getting from preening their feathers, or literally from the food that they eat. They're messy eaters, it's covered in soil all the time. They could get it from the air that they breathe, so can you and I. They could get it from the water that they drink. Mining was a very, very important one that was thrown at me, especially uranium mining, because uranium, through billions of years of radioactive decay, will give rise to lead. So wherever you find uranium, you will find lead as well. And in a resource-rich country like South Africa, that was an important source to look at. The other one was lead mining, which in South Africa is fairly limited. There's one active lead mine in South Africa, and that is just south of the Namibian border, near the Orange River, between the towns of Aggeneys and Pofadder. I had to look at coal combustion and then also the mining processes involved in extracting those metals. I had to look at the petrochemical industry. I had to look at legacy lead from fuel, and by that I mean the lead that remains in the environment to this day because of the leaded fuel that our cars combusted for decades and decades and decades. Lead is an element. It will never break down into its constituent parts like a compound. It will be there forever. So it'll never go away. So I had to look at that. And then obviously I had to look at ammunition as well. Two sources I could eliminate very quickly. The one was water. The water that I sampled where these birds could be drinking had lead levels that was so low it couldn't even be picked up with the analyzer that I was using. The other was the petrochemical industry, because there just is no overlap between the petrochemical industry in South Africa and whiteback vulture distribution. The others I had to sort out by other means. To do that, I used lead isotope analysis, and this is where I need you to sit up straight because I'm now going to take you back to your high school science classes. And what I did here is I looked at the different isotopes that lead has. So lead has got 4 different isotopes. It's got lead 204, lead 206, lead 207, and lead 208. So the only difference between those 4 isotopes are the number of neutrons in their core. So all of them are lead, but they've got different numbers of neutrons in their core. And because of that, they've got different weights. Does everyone understand that? Because it's quite an important concept. So all those isotopes are the result of radioactive decay, with the exception of lead 204. And it's the radioactive decay of uranium and thorium. And that happens over billions and billions of years. So if I take a rock outside this center, I can test for all 4 of those isotopes, and they will occur in different ratios depending on where the rock is coming from. And that has found massive application in pollution studies, because if you have a point of pollution and you can quantify what those ratios are, then you can trace it back to where the pollution is coming from. Is everyone happy with that concept? Okay, great. So in my study, I used mainly the ratio of lead 207 to lead 206, but you'll see in some instances I had to look at these other ratios as well. So first of all, what I did, over two or three years, I collected blood samples from whiteback vulture chicks at Dronfield Nature Reserve. So Kimberley is a smallish town in South Africa's Northern Cape province, on the border with the Free State province. And it's quite a small reserve. It's only about 12,000 hectares, but we've got close to 140 whiteback vulture nests on the reserve. And they breed in these camel thorn trees or on the power lines that crisscross the reserve. So I collected my blood samples there. And the first thing I had to do is I had to get the lead out of the blood samples. And that is a lot more complicated than it sounds. It's not just like pouring it through a sieve and getting the lead out, unfortunately. And to do this, I had to work with some incredibly clever people, geochemists from the University of the Witwatersrand. And they had this very rare thing called an ultra-clean, trace metal clean laboratory. It's the only one of its kind in Africa. It's built bunker style underground with massive extractor fans that make sure that you are basically working in the cleanest environment in Africa. It's actually quite interesting, if you permit me just to share some nerdy details with you. It's 4 connecting rooms. You wear a hazmat suit. You go through an airlock with a sticky floor to take off all the dust underneath your shoes. And you go into the first room. The fans take all the dust off you. Then you go through another airlock into a cleaner room, through another airlock, through a yet more cleaner room, until you're finally in this room where this lady is working. And that is probably the cleanest, one of the cleanest places in the world. So what you did first is you treat the blood sample with all sorts of acids, and that dissolves all the organic materials, such as the red blood cells, etc. And then you have to remove all the other metals in the blood, because there's iron, there's calcium, there's zinc in that blood sample. You need to strip all of that out until you only have lead left. And that is what that lady is doing there. And finally, after weeks and weeks of work, you're left with that. And that is the lead in all the birds that I sampled, suspended in a pool of nitric acid. So now you can imagine how nervous I was handling that, because that was very expensive. I then took those samples over to the University of Johannesburg, to their Department of Geology, where they've got one of these beauties. It's called a multi-collector. This is my party trick. It's a multi-collector inductively coupled plasma mass spectrometer. Okay. And this machine costs about over $1 million, I think. And it costs about as much to run. Every morning when they switch it on, they have to cough up 8,000 Rand. And that's because that is a bath of argon gas. So what you do is you insert the lead sample on this side here, and it fires it at close to the speed of light, probably, through that beam of argon gas. And remember I said that those different isotopes have got different weights? When it goes around that corner there, because of inertia, the beam will differentiate into its different isotopes because of the different weights. And that is then recorded in these cups here called Faraday cups. Isn't that cool? I mean, science is amazing. Okay. Yeah. No, it's incredible. And I can't tell you the pressure I was under to work on this, because this machine is so oversubscribed. They literally told me you had from 8 until 10 o'clock at night. I was sleeping on the floor in this laboratory to do this, because the next day it was booked out to do something else. But what a pleasure this was. It was really an incredible experience. So that machine gave me a set of data that made me weep for many weeks, because I couldn't make head or tail of it. But eventually I sorted it out in my head, and I could finally figure out where the lead in vulture blood was coming from. So first of all, I looked at uranium. What you've got there, you see those black triangles there, that is the lead isotopic signatures of lead in vulture blood, the vultures that I sampled. Sorry, I'm not familiar with this thing, my apologies. The brown there are the lead isotopic signatures of lead in mine tailings dams in Gauteng. So those are on gold mines in Gauteng. And for those of you who don't know, uranium is frequently a byproduct of gold mining. And as I said, wherever you have uranium, there will be lead as well. So you can see there's a limited overlap there between the uranium isotopic signatures and the whiteback vulture blood, but it's insufficient to explain the signatures that we found in the vultures. And the limited overlap that we see there is probably some surface contamination of the soil, but really, based on that, I could eliminate that. That would be of interest to you. That is the isotopic signatures of mine tailings from uranium mines in Namibia. And I included that here because I saw from my tracking data that many of my birds love Namibia. They just, the moment they fledge, I say, cheers, I'm going north. And based on this, you can see there's just absolutely no overlap. The important one here, however, is this little inconspicuous pink triangle here. That is a sample I probably obtained illegally from a uranium mine in South Africa's northwest province. That is the isotopic signature of pure uranium mined in South Africa. And as you can see, it is so completely different than the lead in vulture blood that I had to put in an axis break to just make it legible. Okay, so based on this, yay, I could eliminate uranium as a source of lead poisoning in whiteback vultures. The next one I looked at was lead mining. As I said, this is limited to just south of the border. Again, the black triangles are the isotopic signatures in our whiteback vultures. That's the isotopic signature of lead mined in South Africa. No overlap. Based on that, I could eliminate that as well. Next, I looked at atmospheric lead, and again, this graph looks at it a little bit from a different angle. Again, the black triangles represent the whiteback vultures. The pink there is the isotopic signatures of lead in the atmosphere, which you and I breathe to this day. And it's so gratifying when science makes sense, because the yellow is the isotopic signature of the leaded fuel that you burnt in your car when you were a teenager. Okay, so you can see that lead is still in the atmosphere to this day. But again, you can see there's no overlap with the whiteback vultures. It's not that the whiteback vultures are not getting lead from the atmosphere. There's a stronger signature that's overriding the signature from the lead in the atmosphere. You mean these bars? Yeah, the way I plotted it, so this is the lead concentration in the whiteback vultures. So I plotted lead 207, 206 against the lead concentration in their blood. So these birds had a higher lead concentration in their blood, whereas these birds were very low. Yeah, no, they're alive. Now, at the time of sampling them, they were alive. Yeah. So the next one I looked at was coal combustion. And as you can see from the green bar there, there's a small overlap. And again, this is probably because of surface contamination of the soil. But again, coal combustion can be eliminated as a potential source. There are two sources I could not eliminate. The one was soil. Roughly half the birds were getting it from soil. As you can see there, that's the gray bar. And all of the birds were getting it potentially from ammunition. So the take-home message from this graph, if you can see these two bars here, these two bars, half the birds could either be getting it from soil or from ammunition, while the other half, those birds there, could only be getting it from ammunition. There was no other possible source that they could be getting it from. So I had to tease that out. And to do that, I referred to a paper published by this lady, De Villiers, in 2010. I never had the pleasure of meeting her, but if I ever do, I'll probably kiss her, because she gave me the information I needed to put the final nail in the coffin. And she did her thesis on the lead levels of soil in South Africa in general. And she collected close to 1,000 samples. You can see how she drove, stopped, took a sample, drove, stopped, took a sample, drove, stopped, took a sample. And she concluded that soil. Yeah. So she concluded that South African surface soil is actually quite depleted in lead. And she attributed that to the fact that South African industry is quite poorly developed. We don't have the heavy pollution that countries in Europe and the US have. So she calculated that only 3% of the samples that she collected had extractable lead levels over 1 micrograms per gram. That is incredibly low. So that is, by extractable lead, I mean the lead that's available for biological uptake. That's what your body can actually extract from the soil. When I measured the lead levels in the soil at Dronfield, it was only 8 micrograms per gram, which is also very low. So that's the total lead. That's not even the extractable lead. So the extractable lead will be even lower. If you look at ammunition, if you look at a gram of ammunition or a bullet, a gram of a bullet, 99% of that gram will be pure lead. Okay, so if a vulture ingests that, that is far better at explaining that than soil lead that's barely 1 micrograms per gram of lead. Okay, does that make sense? All right. So based on that, I concluded that the only possible source of lead that could explain the lead levels that we are seeing in our birds is ammunition. Okay, and this is where it's coming from. This photo I took on a hunting farm in KwaZulu-Natal in the north, on a commercial hunting farm. They've got their own abattoir. The animals are skinned and all the entrails and stuff are put out here for the vultures to feed on. And this farmer is prodigiously proud of this. He's even built a little hide for photographers to come and photograph the birds. But unfortunately, I had to give him the bad news that he's actually poisoning birds by putting that out there. And this is the reality that a vulture is facing. So a lead bullet is designed to fragment into 1 million pieces because that way it will kill an animal very, very quickly and decisively. So the scary part here is not the stuff that you can see through this radiograph. The scary part is the bits that you can't see. This sort of dust, the lead dust, what we call nanoparticles. A vulture's stomach is so acidic. When a particle that small hits that stomach, it will become available for biological uptake instantly. And that is where the birds are being poisoned. Did you raise your hand, sir? No, didn't. Okay, cool. Right. So the next question I had to turn to was the so what question. We know that our vultures are being poisoned, but I don't see any problem with that. They don't seem to mind. Well, I needed to look at that because we couldn't just say that it has no effects on them whatsoever. So to do that, I'm sorry, there's a slide missing here, which I forgot to put in. My apologies. I not only collected samples from whiteback vultures, I also collected samples from Cape vultures. And to do that, I went to the Eastern Cape to a colony called Karrenmarkspruit. This was during COVID. And I collected blood samples over 2 years from the chicks on the colony there. And I took those samples to the University of KwaZulu-Natal, where this time I worked with some biochemists. And please don't be intimidated by what I've put here. This is just to show the millions of steps that the body has to go through to produce heme. Now, heme is the main compound or component of hemoglobin. And hemoglobin is the stuff that carries the oxygen throughout your blood. So if you are not manufacturing hemoglobin properly, you will become anemic as a result. Now, remember earlier I said, that lead interferes with those key elements in the body. One of them is zinc. And what it does there, when the body converts delta aminolevulinic acid to porphobilinogen, it kicks zinc out of that reaction and substitute lead instead, and basically stops that reaction dead there. So no heme forms. And what this lady did is she took all the samples that I had flash frozen on liquid nitrogen. She put them through a rigorous steps of reactivation and I don't know what else. And before I had even put this on a graph, she said to me, Linda, those birds, those very pale samples that you can see there, those are the birds that have very high lead levels. And the reason why those samples are so pale is because those birds are manufacturing no porphobilinogen. In other words, they will eventually not manufacture any heme whatsoever. This is what it looked like when I put it on a graph. The green is whiteback vultures, the blue is Cape vultures. And as you can see, the higher their blood lead level goes, the more problematic these birds find it to manufacture hemoglobin. I then wanted to look at two things. I wanted to find out at what point will these birds start experiencing severe physiological stress. And I worked out that for whiteback vultures, that would be at a blood lead level of around 52 micrograms per deciliter in the blood. And for Cape vultures, that would be as low as 18.8. And the reason why Cape vultures seem to be so much more sensitive to the effects of lead than whiteback vultures is a mystery to me. I don't know. And then once their blood lead level went over 100 micrograms per deciliter, they started displaying compromised liver function as well. Now, please keep in mind that these birds that I sampled are nest-bound chicks. They haven't even fledged yet. So we all raptor-biologists will tell you that a bird's most vulnerable time of its life is its first year, because they are incredibly naive and they fall victim to all sorts of anthropogenic threats. If we now allow them to fledge with a significant body burden of lead to boot, we are just setting them up to fail. Okay, so the next thing I wanted to find out, I wanted to test this. I wanted to see, okay, so once their blood lead level goes over 52 micrograms per deciliter, what happens? To do that, I went back to Dronfield and I put tracking devices on birds that were on the verge of fledging. So I took a blood sample, I measured their blood lead level, and then I put a tracking device on them and I watched them closely for the first 12 weeks after they fledged. And this is what I saw. So for the sake of time, I'm going to focus on this graph on the right here. And that is the size of their home range around their nest for the first 12 weeks after they fledged. And as you can see, I want to focus on the birds in green and maroon first. And those are the birds that had blood lead level under 52 micrograms per deciliter. And as you can see here, in week 1, they fledged. They may be branched or hopped to the next tree and hopped back, stayed very close to home. And as the weeks pass and they gain more confidence and they gain more strength, their home range sizes will gradually expand until they eventually leave their natal area completely. And that is what you would expect from a newly fledged raptor. That's what they do. However, for the birds with blood lead level over 52, the picture was completely different. They fledged, and in many instances, they just stayed on the nest. They would maybe flop to the local vulture restaurant and flop back, but not much else. This bar here is slightly skewed by one bird that one day just took off and promptly died in Namibia. For reasons I will investigate, Olga. And you can see even here on the left, look at their ability to travel long distances. They just can't. They just can't. And this is what it looks like in practice. So this will be a little bit more intuitive for you guys. Norman, I named him after Norman Bates in Psycho because he tried to take my eyes out. He had a bloodlet level of 26. It was a male. He fledged from Dronfield, which is over here. Flew south to the Eastern Cape, didn't like it much, and then shot up to Botswana. And I think he's still hanging around there to this day. This is Kevin. Kevin also fledged from Dronfield, spent some time in Northwest Province, and then one day just took off to central Angola and came back and unfortunately died on a power line in South Africa. But then in the same space of time, this is Elsie. Elsie had a bloodlet level of 83. There's Elsie in the same period of time. She just sat on the nest. In fact, 7 months after she fledged, her parents had already relayed for the following year, and she was still hanging around on the nest. When she eventually left her natal area, she died on a carcass that was treated with ant poison. But I think at that point, she was already out of it completely. That is the problem with lead. It kills so slowly. It kills very slowly. In fact, no, not really, because not all vultures fly thousands of kilometers. That's also a personality thing. You know, I've seen it with many of my other track birds. Some of them will travel a lot, but they'll stay localized within South Africa. And some will one day just take off. I had another bird, Josephine, who actually fed on your seal colony on the Skeleton Coast. So some birds fly long distances, some don't, but this is abnormal. That is very abnormal. Yes, but it was below that critical level of 52. Okay. And I cannot stress this enough. You know, what we don't know, remember, I tested the extreme. I tested the extreme of over 52. We don't know the fine scale effects of lower blood lead levels. You know, it may be that Norman had a calcium deficiency, so his response to lead could have been worse. We don't know. These are questions that I could not answer in my research. Okay. So in summary, we now know that lead poisoning in vultures is widely prevalent in chicks and adults. It's definitely coming from lead ammunition, and that as a result, chicks that haven't even fledged yet are suffering from anemia and liver damage. And they're fledging with compromised health, which can only inhibit their survival during that critical first year. So what are the challenges? We now need to get people to shoot with lead-free ammunition. And these are the challenges and my biggest headache at the moment, because for the bulk of it, it boils down to a complete lack of awareness. The moment that bullet leaves a gun, people don't stop thinking about it. They don't think about the potential impact of that bullet once they fired that shot. And they definitely don't think about vultures, and they don't think about humans. It is common practice in South Africa on these hunting farms. They'll have informal workers that come and help with the skinning and the gutting of these animals to cut out the blood meat. And what they'll do is they'll take the blood meat that was cut out, they'll take the internal organs, put it in a bucket and say to these guys, okay, you can take from that whatever you want, and we'll give the rest to the scavengers. So those guys are feeding that lead-riddled meat to their families. Another challenge is the availability of alternatives, although I must stress that that is changing very, very quickly in South Africa for rifle ammunition, but not for lead shot, unfortunately. The alternatives available for lead shot are still very, very limited. It's the cost of the alternatives. But I've just had a guy, which I'm going to speak to you about now, he did a very in-depth analysis for me on the cost comparisons between lead and lead-free, and it's really not as dramatic as people will make you believe. In fact, there are some instances where brass bullets are cheaper than lead bullets. And what I encounter very, very frequently is that it's immediately perceived as criticism of hunting. And as a conservation organization, we were immediately mistrusted as a bunch of tree-hugging greenies who are trying to destroy the hunting industry. And, you know, that could not be further from the truth. So what are the implications for you as a consumer? And this is now a conscious decision I took at the end of last year when all of this other research finally came to an end. And I thought, well, if they're not going to care about vultures, maybe they're going to care about what they feed to their children. So the South African government and the EU, I don't know what the case is in Namibia, set no maximum limits on the amount of lead that is permissible in game meat. That level is set for all other kinds of farmed meat, for beef, chicken, pork, even fish, but not for venison. Okay? So as a result, producers of game meat are under no obligation to test their product for lead levels, for toxic metals. Game meat inspectors, which are mandatory at any hunting farm, they only look at carcasses and look for things like disease, measles, things like that. They're not interested in heavy metals, or they're not even looking for fragments of lead, for that matter. In a study conducted by this gentleman published in 2022, he tested, I think, 28 impala carcasses that were culled out of a helicopter, and he found that none of them adhere to the limits set by the EU for lead in beef, for instance. However, I found his study was a bit skewed because he tested the untreated meat. And by untreated, I mean he tested the meat before the blood meat was even cut out, all of that. And then, as I explained to you earlier, offal and blood meat are frequently given to farm workers. So I'm telling you now that, you know, it's so modern to describe venison as the leaner and healthier alternative to beef and pork. But that means nothing if you are feeding yourself a toxic heavy metal. Okay. So what are we at BirdLife South Africa doing now? We just in November employed a vulture conservation officer called Justin Henry. And the last thing we needed was another academic, such as myself. We needed a guy who knows his stuff, who knows guns, who knows ballistics, and can talk to hunters in their own language. So we employed him, and I can already see the difference. They open like butterflies when they hear Justin talk, where it's with me, you know, I'm the one who's attacking hunting. And he's currently assisting many, many game reserves, especially in the Lowveld, with the testing and developing of lead-free alternatives. And we've got some of the major game reserves in the Greater Kruger now switching to lead-free for their culling operations because of that. I'm also assisting the BirdLife Africa Partnership Secretariat. You heard Holger talk about some workshops that we're having. I just returned from Tanzania where we had another one, and we are now finally bringing this issue to the table in all Southern African countries. We're also assisting with a game harvesting protocol in the Greater Kruger area, which will require lead or venison coming out of that region to be harvested with lead-free ammunition only. And then I'm also working with the Medical Research Council to lower the risk of workers on hunting farms. Importantly, and this is my latest baby, I am testing lead levels in venison. Not the venison from animals that have immediately been shot. I want to see what is ending up in our supermarkets and in our butcheries. So I've already tested or completed a pilot study from some of the venison sold in South Africa's major supermarket chains. I'm not going to name them because I don't want to be sued. But what I can say is that the results are interesting. It seems that quality cuts of meat, such as steak fillet, that's fine. It's the products, the byproducts, such as borscht, meat sold as potjie or dry borscht. It's stuff like that. A quarter of the samples that I tested were over the limit for lead. I recently returned from the Lowveld, and I oh, sorry, not from the low flight, from Kimberley. I had samples from Kimberley tested, and I'm seeing the same pattern there. I tested some mincemeat. Again, quarter of the samples were over that limit. I had one sample that was 1.5 and the limit is 0.1. So how much is that? That's 15 times the limit. Okay. And those are samples just taken randomly out of a packet of mincemeat. Okay. So that's it from my side. Any questions?
Wow. Thank you, Linda. I'm just going to put something out here to the group here. How many of you get game meat from the farm? I'm just going to leave it there. Then we'll answer some questions. Yeah, just next one, maybe run it through the X-ray or something. It's not going to help you. All right. Well, the scary part is there is no facility in Namibia that can actually do these tests. The guys on the mines that get tested for lead, Roshpina and Tsumeb, their samples get sent to South Africa to be tested. So, yeah, anyway, questions, please. How long does it take for a bullet to travel out of the rifle to the... It's instant. I mean, you saw those X-rays that Linda showed you. Those were just the visible particles of lead when that bullet shatters. They are micro particles like dust. They didn't even see. So it's instant. It's literally instant.
So the lead doesn't get distributed that way. It's just the momentum of the bullet hitting the carcass, and it gets shattered and sprayed throughout the carcass. It's not actually absorbed.
Goodness. Well, there's lead-free ammunition. And this is whatever his name is, Justin has been employed to look at. The issue with lead-free ammunition is the cost. It's copper, it's brass, etc. It was actually developed as a high-performance ammunition. So it costs more, and you have to be much more accurate. So you can't have your 90-year-old Opa coming to hunt an animal on your farm anymore. You actually have to be really accurate with your shot. And part of the issue is it takes a little bit longer, they say up to 10 to 15 seconds for the animal to die, because it's a clean wound. So you have to shoot either through the heart, best to shoot it through the head. But the alternatives are available, they're just more expensive. But yeah, they're working on it.
So copper, for instance, as a metal will not fragment like lead will. But they are now working on designs to make it mushroom more, to create a bigger impact, to create percussion waves that will basically burst the heart to make the animal drop quickly, things like that. But I am not the expert. That is why I got Justin to do that. And I am happy to share whatever information we have with you guys if you want it.
Yeah. The question is the calibers. The caliber lead-free is not available in all calibers. Yeah, and it doesn't twist, and you need to rebore your rifle and all kinds of stuff.
The way I understand it from Justin, copper, for instance, or brass is not as heavy as lead. So you need a longer projectile to gain the same weight. So because of that, that has impact on the twist rate in the rifle. That's my Boere understanding.
Any more, Dieter?
They tell me that the hunters from Germany or from Europe coming with different ammunition out to this country. They even got around, the cover is around plastic inside the bullet. And
Yeah.
they say,
Yeah, in Europe, there's major legislation on its way to ban all leaded ammunition, also shot. So they're far ahead of us. But I think the problem here is basically just the cost. And remember, most of the meat here that gets shot is actually for own use. We have a lot of farmers that supply their workers themselves with meat, sell it to make a little bit of extra income. So I think our market is completely different to the European market. In Europe, it's mostly trophy hunting and hunting for sport, whereas here, it's a completely different market. Our trophy hunting market, if you look at the number of animals that get shot in this country, is actually very little compared to what gets shot for rations and shoot and sell and biltong and all that. It doesn't get tested, that's the problem. We are. Yeah, we export beef, but I'm not sure. Maybe some venison, I'm not sure. We'd have to look into this. But beef definitely, yeah, but that's different. It gets killed at the abattoir. There's no, as far as we know, there's no lead involved. That's a totally different thing, Liz.
And so I think that it's that we're not put the word out, because even our organic meat is contaminated. Perhaps not in every case, but it really then comes back to us, not actually putting the word.
Yeah, no, okay, yeah, I fully agree with you, Liz. The so-called organic meat is probably not as organic. No, it's probably organic, but it's got metal in it. Yeah, but remember also, we only just started with this lead work in this country. We've only been going, I think it's almost 2 years now. So it's only not just going. So we need to get the word out, especially to farmers and other users. I think the hunters, we've got NAFA on board on our, we have a national lead working group. NAFA is on board with it. I think, yeah, so the thing is we need to talk to NAU, to the farmers' unions. We need to actually talk to the farmers. And more importantly, we need to talk to the tannies, not the ooms. If you get to a farmers' union meeting and you tell the ooms there, julle moenie lood gebruik nie, then they tell you, jy praat, you know what. But then you get all the tannies together and you say, kom ons praat gou so 'n bietjie hierso. And you put them together and you say, do you know that you're actually poisoning your children with the meat you're feeding them? And I think you will get a faster reaction out of that than when you try and maybe you can go drastic and ban lead ammunition, but it's not going to help because there's so much out there. People will still use it. So you need to use the education side of it to get people up to speed, to actually realize what they're doing to themselves. Willie.
Yeah, you see, the problem is that I frequently get that question. So, we'll just bury the blood meat, and as I said, lead is an element. It will never break down. Once it's out there, it's out there. So now you're putting it into the ground. If that soil is only slightly acidic, it will gradually dissolve those lead fragments and it will go into the groundwater. It'll be taken up by plants or by invertebrates. So for me, the management side of things is second best. I can understand in countries like Mozambique where they still shoot with AK-47s. I can understand that. But I think in South Africa, especially, we now need to start moving away from excuses and realize that the only real solution that we've got is to shoot lead-free. We cannot, as I said at the beginning of my talk, it's completely unfathomable to me that we have all these massive regulations in place on the uses of lead, the safe uses of lead, but we can indiscriminately fire this toxic metal into our environment. It makes absolutely no sense to me.
Ulrich. Yeah, getting lead-free ammunition in this country is still a problem. It's apparently a problem of importing it. So at the customs at the border is apparently the problem. It's not the shops here. When we started with our lead working group, we went to the gun shops and the ammunition dealers and asked them if they would stock lead-free ammunition, and they were quite willing. But it's apparently a real palaver to get lead-free ammunition into this country. And I don't know why. It's some stupid customs regulation or something. We're working on it, and hopefully we can address it. But yeah, the availability of lead-free ammunition is still an issue. But like Dieter said earlier, a lot of the European hunters that come into the country, they bring their own ammunition, and a lot of that is already lead-free. So yes, that have been modified. Yeah, yeah. Ish, you want to start a war? Willem. Willem has a question. Yeah, I don't know. Linda, have you looked at that? The dump sites, the city dumps where people dump batteries and all kinds of other nasty things with lead in it. Has anybody looked at that?
No. I mean, I looked at vultures. So, I mean, the risk for a vulture in South Africa on that, it's not like Central Africa where the hooded vultures, feed on the dump sites and things like that. So. Marabou stocks, yeah, which still need to be evaluated, very much so. Yeah, absolutely. But for vultures, I can promise you it's ammunition.
And you've been getting the flack for it as well. These are. You get good money for it. You get good money for old car batteries.
They may not be sent to the car batteries get sent to South Africa and reused. Whereas torch batteries are classed as what do you call it? Poison. They may not go over the border.
Yeah.
I do the illegal thing. I collect them all for my family. I can actually box, close it, and bring it to guys who are bringing down the batteries in South Africa.
You bad boy, you. Yeah. No, especially those small torch batteries and pen light batteries, they are a big problem because there's no way to easily recycle them. Yeah, but where does that drum go? Probably to the rubbish dump. Yeah. It goes to that hazardous waste facility. You just made my day. Philip. If you want to convert to lead-free, yeah. Yeah, the actual rifling, you're right. Yeah, I think there's some major recycling questions that have to be asked, and what happens to the stuff when we recycle it. Where does it go? Yeah, but where does that go when it leaves St. Paul's? There's an e-waste container at Dagbreek as well. I drop all my stuff there, so. Oh, okay. Any, Liz?
And when it actually is contaminated. And then one of the things that you didn't raise, I think you raised it before, is that issue of stereotypy in the bird, where these bones are twisted. You see it sometimes in Namibia. South Africa had a big time in the 70s in the Cape Vulture colonies, which were especially the ones outside Artificial Dam area, which was already very industrial. And there was intensive farming going on. And those bones are still lying around. Is there a potential for research in terms of where those chicks get fed?
Liz, the only way to really do that is in a controlled study. And I'm not going to do a study where I deliberately poison a bird with lead to see how it develops. I just don't have the stomach for that. And I also don't know of any ethics committee in South Africa that's going to allow you to do that with a critically endangered bird. To work with wild birds is going to be very difficult because you don't know when they're going to be exposed subsequent to that. In terms of the osteodystrophy, what Liz means by that is that because lead interferes with calcium absorption, calcium is an important element in the construction of bones. So when the lead finally gets absorbed by the liver and the kidneys, it gets transported into the bones where it binds lead instead of calcium. And that results in brittle bones. They've seen with people with high lead levels, they've got very brittle bones. And that is a theory I had, that this osteodystrophy that people, I don't know how many of you are aware of that, in the 90s and early 2000s, there was this major concern about Cape vultures that were found with very brittle bones. And the prevailing theory was then that they were suffering from calcium deficiencies. So they started putting out bone chips at vulture restaurants to supplement their diet. And that seems to take care of the problem. But I was wondering, what role lead was playing in that osteodystrophy. And that's something I attempted to look at in my PhD thesis, but I really did not have sufficient samples at higher bone lead levels to come to a conclusion. But there was one sample that I had of a Cape vulture that had a bone lead level of 32 micrograms per gram. Now, that is incredibly high. That bird could not have died of anything else. And its bone density was very low. But I could not base a conclusion on one sample. So that definitely needs additional work.
Okay, any more questions? Just by the way, if you remember those nice little maps that Linda showed you of the birds with low levels flying far and the one with high levels not going anywhere, I can show you exactly the same stuff from Namibia. We've got 3 birds with trackers. 2 of them are moving around like anything. The other one has hardly moved from the nest. And that nest is, as the vulture flies, probably about 5 kilometers from Lange Heinrich uranium mine. Food for thought. So far, yes, but we're expecting it to pig anytime soon. We have already, in principle, made a decision that we will sample as much as possible, whenever, wherever, however. Where we're going to analyze the stuff, we don't know. Liz. Yes, of course. No, I think it's actually operational again. Not. Okay. Yeah, they started at one stage and then, okay. Yeah. No, unfortunately, those 3 birds that I'm talking about, we never took blood samples from them, which I can kick myself now for not doing. because it would have been very interesting to see, especially one that's not moving, what the lead levels in that one's blood are. All right. Thank you very much, everybody. I think Gudrun has a little present for Linda. Yes, I think so. I think she deserves another round of applause. Yes, Linda logged 2 lifers this morning. So, okay, there are some snacks at the back, and I think there's a little bit of beer left in the fridge. So please, everybody, have a good time, and thank you very much for attending.